yes, I
Hi,
see.
thank you
Okay, yeah,
guys.
yeah, great.
So I'm here to talk about security, and I realize there might be many different backgrounds of security. So I'm going to start kind of framing it in ways you might think about it familiarly. And then we're going to talk about what I believe is a true revolution in how people address cybersecurity, and it's predictive security. When most people think about security, you might start with protection. In your home, this might be bars on your windows that prevent somebody from breaking in. On your computer, this might be configuring it so that it doesn't have vulnerabilities on it. Then, if somebody does break in, you might have a detection system. In the case of physical security, this might be a burglar alarm. In the case of digital security, this might be an antivirus system. And then if somebody does break in and you have to clean it up, there's remediation. This is maybe perhaps calling a locksmith after someone's broken in. And then once you've cleaned up the mess, you've picked up the glass, you might dust for prints. You want to find out who did it, because you want to make sure they never did it again. And in security, this is called attribution. You want to attribute the attack to somebody. And then the final thing is, if your attribution was successful, you might figure out who it was. This is response, and by the way, that is actually Jim Morrison. And there's a number of problems in security that we face today. And I think in all forms of very highly technical things, there's a really, really important concept, Tanstoffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. There's no magic. It's not, if you buy a product, it will make your life better. Everything has pros and cons. And in security, we're going to look at detection systems in particular, and what are the hard trade-offs that we've had to make in the past for detection and how we can potentially get better. Detection, we showed the example of the burglar alarm, but in cybersecurity, detection is really you making a prediction about something you see in front of you based on what you can observe about it and what you know about your past. This is your knowledge. And many detection systems have a model. You have some input data that you use, you have a model, and you have an output, which is a classification, a credit score, something like that. And I'm not going to go too deep into what's inside the model, just assume it's science and magic right now. But the key things, if you're thinking about detection systems you may have used, is an anti-malware system, fraud detection, breach detection, an intrusion detection system. These are common things that almost every IT department in the world has. But the real key trade-off, and this is the Tanstoffel, which is when you choose a system, that system has a design criteria. It is designed either to reduce false positives or to reduce false negatives. And you have to choose one. If you have low false positives, you have to accept high false negatives. What this means in the real world, if you imagine like airport security is designed to make sure terrorists never make it on planes. That's reducing false negatives. A false negative is a terrorist making it on a plane. But in order to have that, you have situations like grannies who have pat-downs. And while you might have thousands and thousands of grannies that get pat-downs for every potential terrorist, that system is designed to make the rate of terrorists on planes absolutely zero. Another system that takes the opposite approach is exemplified here. You may have recalled the incident where the New York Times was purportedly attacked by Chinese military intelligence. In that situation, the New York Times is running antivirus software. There were 45 pieces of custom malware used in this attack. As part of that, only one of them was detected by their antivirus software. Antivirus is designed to make sure that you never have false positives. You never want to accidentally identify an attack where none existed, because that gets in the way of line of business. But in order to do that, they have created the ability to have false negatives. They missed new attacks they've never seen before. And the fundamental trade-off here is for a given amount of input data that you have, no matter how fancy your algorithm is, you're going to have this trade-off. And the only way to get better is to actually have more data. And what we mean by that is having more data that can be used to predict the threat. Because if you have a limited set of data, there's only so much analysis of that data you can do. But in the enterprise, oftentimes the data is not operationalized. It's in a steaming pile. Many IT admins have shelled into a server, grepping an access log in order to get access to some really important data in terms of a breach. Or you might search one of your security event correlation systems. But most often, it looks like this, is you had the data in front of you to make the decision, but it wasn't operationalized, and you didn't actually find what you were looking for before it happened, so you had to find it after the fact. And in mobile, this is actually really important, because you have the same sorts of attacks against mobile devices as you do on PCs, but there are way more devices. So we multiply all of our data and our scale and all false positive and false negative problems by a very large factor. And I would say I truly empathize with anyone in an IT role right now, because you have this giant problem to deal with, and you don't have a choice. You can't say, well, let's wait 3 years until the technology catches up and we can deploy mobile safely. You just don't. And if you look at the growth of mobile devices, over the past few years, it's grown exponentially, way bigger than the PC. And in businesses, there's nearly 1 billion smartphones that will be used for business around the world by 2017. So when we talk about mobile threats that are similar to PC, we tend to break it down into a number of factors. One is apps. Most people are familiar with these. These are bad apps that can take your data, compromise the device, be used as a launch pad for attacking the enterprise itself. Configuration of the device. Misconfigured devices can be insecure. The firmware in the device itself. Most people are familiar with this with rooting and jailbreaking, but those same forms of vulnerabilities that are used to root and jailbreak can also be used to actually attack the device itself or undermine any enterprise security controls that are there. The data. This is oftentimes in terms of accidental or intentional data leakage. And of course, the network. This is a lot of different things to worry about. And I think it's also worthy to deconstruct. There's this belief that iOS has pixie dust, and as far as I know, there have never been a pixie dust mine in the world located. And really, iOS is not more or less secure than Android. It is less targeted amongst mainstream consumer-focused attacks. And what I mean by that is, if you follow the news this morning, there was an iOS attack, particularly based in China, that used a PC that was infected with malware to go compromise a connected iOS device. And it was used to steal payment credentials for Chinese auction and payment sites, Alipay in particular, and Taobao. And what I mean by this is, iOS and Android are both platforms. They're both computers. They both have vulnerabilities. Every major category of threat affects both platforms. For consumers, Android is a larger platform in the world and is therefore more targeted. However, iOS, particularly for the enterprise, for a motivated adversary, has the exact same risks as Android. And of course, the way you dealt with this in the enterprise before the advent of the modern smartphone is you had a BlackBerry. And most enterprises I talk to, I ask them, so what did you do to their BlackBerry? And they turned off everything. They even turned off the camera. Right? And if you go to a modern enterprise and say, hey, you can't download any apps except for the 3 that we approve, and by the way, the approval process takes 2 months, and we're going to turn off your camera, you're going to get fired. That's just not even a choice. And so, the question is, how do you deal with that? And for us, we look at apps because just as of January this year, apps became the primary way people, at least in the United States, access the internet, above the PC browser and the mobile browser. And that's a really important shift. Mobile devices, and particularly mobile apps, have become the primary means of accessing the internet. That's huge. And in terms of threats, what you're seeing on the screen here is these are 2 multinational firms. On the left, there's a sample size of 200 devices with threat assessment. On the right is a sample set of 60 devices. And we looked at, okay, what threats did those enterprise devices encounter over a period of time? And if you see, actually, in both cases, the top threat was something called not compatible, which allows cybercrime to bridge onto an enterprise corporate network. Again, I don't mean to say, oh, hey, everyone should go run for the hills and turn off mobile. You can deal with these problems. But the point is, they're real, and you have to deal with them. And it's not just something that you can respond to each thing individually and say, okay, read about it in the paper and block it. The scale is big. There are millions of apps in the world and tens of thousands of new apps added daily. There's no enterprise in the world that could actually deal with that scale manually. And so the question is, how do we get predictive? And if we're doing reactive security like we've done in the past, I don't believe we can deal with that scale. Reactive security, it can either take the form of once you know something's bad, so known threats or known threat patterns, as in the case of antivirus systems. Those tend to minimize false positives, aka they're really good at detecting things you know about, but bad at finding the things that you didn't know about. But you could also have things that look like anomaly detection systems that are really good at detecting new things, but they're also really good at waking you up at 3 a.m. because they created 40,000 alerts in a day. And one of them was all of your credit card numbers of your company leaving the door, but you don't know which of the 40,000 it is, and that's the problem. And the root of it is most detection systems today focus on identifying the bank robber leaving the vault or the bank robber having left the vault a week ago. And I asked the question of how do we get to identifying that a bank robber might enter the vault next week? And I think that's possible now. And when we look at the road that we've taken to get to prediction, I think you can see why. So early 90s, late 80s, there were malware, there were attacks, there were network issues. And we invented technology to deal with that. And this was the advent of IDS, intrusion detection, antivirus, and it actually was reasonably effective. And if you look at an economic model, these numbers are made up, but they're directionally accurate. A malware writer might spend $100 to create an attack. They might spend $1 to use that attack against a particular target, but the defender, in order to detect that attack, might spend $100 in resources to do it. And then once they find that attack, they might spend $100 to clean it up. But the bad guy in that case might only spend $1 to change that attack to evade the static signatures, a few bytes here and there, and they can reuse that attack again. And when you can trivially evade detection, economically, you have a giant mismatch in defender versus attacker cost. And this is the fundamental root of why security has been so bad over the last 2 decades, in my opinion, is you just have a tremendous economic mismatch. So very smart people in the security industry invented 2 new technologies. One is dynamic analysis. So this is sandboxes. So you might have, anytime a PDF comes onto your network, it's run in a sandbox, as well as global reputation. So you connect all these systems up to the cloud, and you can actually run different analysis than you could otherwise. That actually had 2 important effects. It actually makes your discovery cost lower because you can use behavior instead of just signatures to identify the attacks. And then it also makes the mutation costs higher because the bad guys can't just change a few bytes here and there. They actually have to change the fundamental behavior of their code. But as you see, from first generation to second generation, it actually really reduced the cost to defend, but we still have this fundamental economic mismatch. So we're still kind of hosed. And the 2 really big problems here are a lot of behaviors are used for good and evil. This is the false positive, false negative problem. You either turn up the sensitivity and make it so that you catch everything, but you wake your IT admin up at 3 a.m. every night with 40,000 alerts, or you turn down the sensitivity and you miss all of the issues. And then further, particularly in mobile, given that Google and Apple run apps in sandboxes, any malware writer, even the most basic consumer malware writer that's targeting users nowadays, knows how to bypass a sandbox. So that doesn't work as well anymore. And the thing I'm really passionate about is how do we get to predictive security? And what we mean by that is actually being able to look at what happens on every single device you're monitoring. You have analysis of that data, and that if there is a breach, you can go back to the data you have and know exactly what was targeted. And this is incredible. And I don't believe you could have done this 5 years ago. And that's why I'm excited about the time we're in today, is that the systems needed to do this didn't exist. Big data analysis software like Hadoop, scalable storage, scalable compute. This is tremendously resource intensive to do. If you look at HP, they collect billions and billions of data points a day just on their internal network. You could not even store those a few years ago. And the key result of all this technology is we can build these predictive systems at mobile scale. And really, when we look at predictive systems, the key advantage is you can use machines to identify these complex signals and data that humans could not identify. Right? These are very, very complex correlations between thousands or even millions of data points that would be virtually impossible for a human. Here's an example of a threat and how it worked. This blue app you see was an app that was actually live in Google Play. It was a voice over IP application, and it gathered contacts. And Google actually said it was good. It was live in Google Play. It passed through all the security. And from a behavioral standpoint, it did something that many apps do. It sent contacts to a server. Many voice over IP applications do this. But when we put it in a correlation system, this is an example of Lookout's output, we could actually see that it had a number of factors that correlated to malware. So even though it did nothing characteristically bad, it didn't match any known malware signature ever created, we can say, hey, this is something in an enterprise you don't want on your network. And what you saw as a simplification, this is the actual output of what such a system looks like. There's no human who would ever build this graph manually, but if you have these big data systems, you can actually start leveraging the power of big data that has been used to predict ads and other things to do security. So quick example of how this works at Lookout. All predictive systems will have an ingest layer. We have a large number of users in the world who can opt in to sharing the applications on their device. We have a number of analysis systems that annotate that data and make it richer, so it's not just a steaming pile of binaries. It actually, we can link them all together. And then what we do is we build a giant graph, and we split it into 2 problems. One is we say, is it related to anyone we've ever seen bad before? And second is we use machine intelligence to say, is this risky? And if you had a smaller data set, none of this would work. But if you have a large global data set from millions and millions of users, it actually works remarkably well. And at the end of the day, most people care about is protecting themselves. And so what this does to the economic side of things is it brings the discovery cost way down because you can predict threats, and it's actually quite accurate automatically. And your response cost is also down because you know every device that's affected, because you have that telemetry from every single device. And the most important realization is that the mutation cost is the same as the creation cost. So every time a bad guy is discovered, they have to rewrite their entire stack. And what that does, from second generation to third generation security, is it actually increases the attacker cost above the defender cost. And this is one of the most important results in security. And perhaps I believe this will be a revolution in how cybersecurity is treated, is that we've actually flipped the economic advantage to the defender side. And put in very simple terms, we need to stop trying to detect the crime using burglar alarms and start trying to use data to predict the crime before it happens. That's what I'm excited about. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.